My name is Rebecca, 33 years old, and for my entire life, I was the family bank masquerading as the family disappointment. The night before my sister's $150,000 wedding, my mother texted me to say I was disinvited because they needed my seat for a wealthy relative. She told me I did not fit the aesthetic. I texted back a single sentence telling her to pay her own bills. She laughed in my face, completely unaware that with 3 clicks on my laptop, I was about to turn her high society wedding into a financial crime scene. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach a toxic family member that your boundaries are not up for negotiation. Growing up in the affluent Chicago suburbs, I quickly learned my exact role. My younger sister Courtney was the beautiful golden child destined for greatness, and I was the workaholic. ATM expected to quietly fund her lavish lifestyle. That toxic dynamic reached its absolute peak on a Thursday night, exactly 24 hours before Courtney was scheduled to have her grand rehearsal dinner. I was sitting in my living room, exhausted from a long week of corporate negotiations, when my phone vibrated loudly on the coffee table. It was a message from my mother, Brenda. For years, my father, Richard, would stand by silently enabling her behavior, so I knew this text came from both of them. I unlocked the screen and read the massive paragraph she had sent. Rebecca, I just finalized the seating chart. Unfortunately, Desmond has an uncle flying in from Atlanta, and we simply do not have the space for you at the main tables. In fact, it is better if you just sit this weekend out entirely. You do not really fit the aesthetic of the country club anyway. Desmond comes from a very prominent, highly respected black family with a lot of old money. We cannot have a corporate drone bringing down the mood and making us look completely average. Do not come to the wedding. This event is only for real family who know how to present themselves. I stared at the glowing screen. For a brief second, the familiar sting of rejection washed over my chest. I had spent the last 8 months quietly funding this entire charade. My parents had convinced Desmond and his family that they were independently wealthy. To keep up this massive lie, my mother had manipulated me into putting the $150,000 country club venue on my card. She used the same emotional guilt trip she always used, claiming I owed them for providing me with basic food and shelter during my childhood. They thought I was just a mid-level employee at a hospitality firm who used a generous corporate discount. They did not know the truth. They did not know I owned the entire corporate entity that managed the exact country club where this wedding was taking place. I did not cry. I did not type out a long paragraph defending my worth or begging for their love. I simply tapped the screen and replied with one single sentence. Fine. Then you can pay for your own wedding. It is okay with me. Less than 30 seconds later, my phone started ringing. It was my mother. I accepted the call and immediately heard the hollow, echoing sound of a speakerphone. In the background, I could hear Courtney giggling while pouring a glass of champagne. Are you actually trying to threaten me? My mother asked, her voice dripping with absolute condescension. You are just a pathetic little event coordinator, Rebecca. You think you can throw a tantrum and cancel a corporate contract. The paperwork is already signed. The venue is fully secured. Courtney chimed in from across the room, her voice loud and mocking. Let her cry, Mom. She is just jealous that I am marrying a wealthy man like Desmond and she is still single and miserable. Listen to me, my mother continued, her tone turning sharp and vicious. I have the confirmation emails. The club has our date locked in. You have zero power here. You are going to sit alone in your apartment this weekend while your sister marries into one of the most respected families in the country. Do not try anything stupid, or your father and I will cut you out of our lives permanently. She ended the call before I could say a single word. She really thought she had won. She thought her cruel words had put me in my place, just like they always had when I was a teenager. But I was not a victim anymore. I slowly lowered the phone to my lap. The apartment was completely silent. I took a deep, steadying breath, finally letting go of the last shred of guilt I had been carrying for these toxic people. I reached over to the coffee table and opened my laptop. The screen illuminated the dark room. I opened my web browser and navigated straight to my corporate banking portal. It was time to show them exactly what a corporate drone could do. I typed in my master administrative password and watched the financial dashboard load, displaying the exact accounts funding their perfect weekend. The game was officially over. The screen illuminated my face with the crisp white and gold interface of the Apex Hospitality Group executive portal. My family truly believed I was a low-level event coordinator who spent her days choosing napkin rings and arranging seating charts for demanding brides. They thought my apartment was rented. They thought my car was leased. They had no idea that 7 years ago I used the small inheritance from my grandmother to purchase a failing boutique hotel, flipped it, and built a commercial real estate empire. Apex Hospitality Group owned 12 luxury venues across the Midwest, including the very country club my mother had selected to showcase her fake wealth. I was not an employee, I was the sole owner and chief executive officer. I clicked on the Active Events tab and pulled up the master file for Courtney's wedding. There it was. A massive portfolio of floral arrangements, imported champagne, a 12-piece band, and a custom-built dance floor. The total invoice sat at exactly $150,000. I scrolled down to the payment section. Under the billing details, my mother had arrogantly listed my corporate black card, exploiting a policy she barely understood. 2 months ago, she showed up at my office crying, claiming my father's business was going through a temporary audit, and they just needed me to act as an internal guarantor to secure the date. It was a lie. They had constructed an entire illusion of generational wealth to impress Desmond's family, using my credit line as their secret foundation. My mother had even demanded I upgrade the menu to include Wagyu beef and truffles, snapping at me that I owed them for every meal I ate as a child. They were completely broke, and they intended to stick me with the final bill while taking all the credit. My eyes locked onto the specific clause granting the wedding a 100% cost deferment based on my employee status. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I moved the cursor to the top right corner of the screen and clicked the bright red button labeled Revoke Guarantor Status. A security prompt immediately popped up on the screen, warning that removing the guarantor would instantly freeze all event logistics and require immediate external payment. The system asked for an executive override code. I typed in my private alphanumeric sequence without a single second of hesitation. The screen refreshed. The status changed from approved to delinquent in bold red letters. But I was not finished. I opened a new tab and logged directly into the American Express corporate banking portal. I navigated to the pending transactions on my black card. The $150,000 hold for the country club catering and venue deposit stared back at me. This was the money my mother bragged about. This was the leverage she thought she had over me. I selected the transaction, clicked on the dispute options, and flagged the charge as unauthorized. I then executed a hard stop on the card, preventing any future manual overrides. The bank system processed the request instantly. The funds were pulled back into my corporate reserve. The financial lifeline they had abused for months was entirely severed. For years, I had allowed them to drain my energy and my finances, believing that if I just gave them enough, they would finally see me as a daughter instead of a transaction. That delusion ended tonight. I sat back and watched the automated workflow of my company take over. A small notification bell chimed on my dashboard. The system had automatically generated an urgent email to the general manager of the country club, a man who answered directly to me. I opened the sent folder to read the automated text. It was cold, professional, and absolutely devastating. Notice of contract breach. The internal financial guarantor for the Courtney and Desmond wedding has been permanently revoked. Initial payment has been declined by the financial institution. Effective immediately, all services, vendor installations, and venue access are suspended pending immediate payment in full. No exceptions. I closed the laptop. The soft click of the screen shutting felt like a heavy iron door slamming shut on 30 years of emotional abuse. I did not feel angry anymore. I did not feel sad. I felt incredibly light. I picked up my phone from the coffee table. The screen was already lighting up with a barrage of texts from Courtney, mocking my apartment and bragging about the designer dress she was going to wear. I did not read them. I swiped down into my settings, turned on Do Not Disturb, and placed the phone face down. I walked into my kitchen, poured myself a generous glass of expensive red wine, and drank it slowly while looking out over the city skyline. Tomorrow morning, my mother and sister would wake up expecting to walk into a fairy tale. Instead, they were going to walk straight into a concrete wall. I finished my wine, turned off the lights, and went to sleep, resting more peacefully than I had in years. At exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, the crisp autumn sunlight reflected off the grand mahogany doors of the Apex Country Club. My mother Brenda and my sister Courtney pulled up to the valet stand in their leased luxury SUV. Courtney was dressed in a pristine white blazer and oversized sunglasses, fully embracing her wealthy bride persona. They were arriving for the final floral walkthrough. According to the original schedule, the grand ballroom was supposed to be overflowing with imported white orchids, crystal seating, and a custom-built staging area for the 12-piece band. Instead, when my mother aggressively pulled the brass handle of the front door, it did not budge. The doors were locked shut. Courtney huffed in annoyance, complaining that the staff was incompetent and ruining her morning aesthetic. My mother knocked sharply on the glass, her face contorted in arrogant indignation. A few moments later, the heavy door clicked open. Mr. Mitchell, the seasoned general manager of the club, stepped into the threshold. He did not step aside to let them in. He stood firmly in the doorway, his posture rigid and his expression completely blank. "What is the meaning of this?" my mother demanded, her voice echoing across the empty stone portico. "We have a floral walkthrough in exactly 10 minutes, and the valet is not even at his podium. Open these doors right now, or I will personally see to it that you are fired. My daughter works for your corporate office, and she will have your job by the end of the day." Mr. Mitchell did not flinch. He had worked in high-end hospitality for 2 decades and was entirely immune to the tantrums of fake socialites. He calmly looked at my mother and adjusted his suit jacket. "Ma'am, the doors are locked because your event has been suspended," he said in a flat, even tone. "The overnight staging crew was sent home at 1 in the morning. Your floral arrangements are currently sitting in refrigerated trucks in the loading dock, and they will not be brought inside." Courtney ripped off her sunglasses, her face turning pale. "Suspended? What are you talking about? Desmond and his parents are coming here at noon to view the ballroom. You cannot suspend my wedding. Do you know who his family is?" "I am acutely aware of the guest list," Mr. Mitchell replied coldly. "However, I am also aware of the financial status of this account." He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a crisp, heavy stock manila folder. He held it out to my mother. She snatched it from his hands, her manicured fingers trembling slightly as she ripped open the flap. Inside was a single piece of paper. It was an itemized invoice for exactly $150,000. "Your corporate guarantor was permanently revoked at midnight by the executive board," Mr. Mitchell explained, his voice echoing with finality. "Furthermore, the credit card on file was flagged for unauthorized use, and the initial deposit was pulled back. Your account is completely delinquent. You owe the full balance of $150,000 payable immediately by wire transfer or certified bank check. If the funds are not secured in our accounts by noon today, the trucks will leave, the venue will be fully dismantled, and your reservation will be permanently canceled." My mother stared at the piece of paper as if it were radioactive. The thick layer of arrogant confidence she wore like armor began to fracture instantly. The reality of her financial ruin was staring her right in the face. She tried to maintain her dominant facade, laughing nervously as she looked at Courtney. "This is just a glitch," she stammered, pulling her phone from her designer handbag. "Rebecca must have messed up the paperwork at her little desk job. I will call her and have her fix this immediately. These corporate systems are always making mistakes." She dialed my number right there on the steps of the country club. She put the phone to her ear, waiting for me to pick up so she could scream at me. But there was no ringing. My phone was on Do Not Disturb. The call went straight to my automated voicemail. She pulled the phone away from her face, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and mounting panic. She dialed again, straight to voicemail. "Mom, do something." Courtney whined, her voice cracking as the reality of losing her perfect wedding set in. "Desmond cannot see this. His parents will cancel the wedding if they find out we cannot afford the venue." My mother grabbed Courtney by the arm, dragging her away from the doors and back toward the parking lot to hide their humiliation from the club staff. Her panic rapidly morphed into vicious, desperate anger. She opened her text messages and began typing furiously, her thumbs slamming against the screen. Back in my apartment, I was just waking up, pouring myself a fresh cup of coffee. I glanced at my phone and saw the notification light blinking. I opened the message from my mother. It was not an apology. It was a declaration of war. "Fix this immediately," her text read. "Turn the card back on right now. If this venue is not open by noon, your father is going to the bank to sell the suburban house today, and while he does that, I am going to the attic and throwing every single one of your grandmother's precious antique heirlooms into the trash compactor. You have 1 hour." I read the text twice. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. They really thought they held the winning hand. They had no idea the house they were threatening to sell already belonged to me. 45 minutes later, my security system chimed with a perimeter alert. My building was located in the heart of downtown Chicago, a sleek glass residential tower that screamed exclusivity and wealth. My parents had only visited the premises once exactly 2 years ago to drop off a cheap birthday card in the lobby because they refused to pay for street parking. They had always assumed I lived in a cramped, dark studio on a lower floor, spending my entire meager salary just to maintain a fancy zip code. They were completely unaware that the elevator button for the penthouse level required a biometric fingerprint scan, or that I owned the entire top floor featuring sweeping panoramic views of Lake Michigan. Because they did not have access to the VIP elevator, they must have slipped past the front desk concierge while he was busy coordinating a delivery, tailgating a resident through the secure lobby doors. Since they could not electronically access the penthouse button, they rode to the highest public floor and took the emergency maintenance stairwell the rest of the way up. I knew this because my smart home tablet displayed a live camera feed the moment the stairwell door was violently breached. I watched the high-definition screen as my father Richard burst into the private penthouse corridor, his face flushed red and sweating profusely from the climb. My mother followed right behind him, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the imported marble floor. They were entirely oblivious to the multi-million-dollar artwork lining the private hallway. They marched right up to my double oak doors and began pounding relentlessly. "Rebecca, open this door right now," my father roared, his voice echoing down the empty hall. "I know you are in there hiding from us. Do not make me break this door down." I took a slow sip of my dark roast coffee, tightened the belt of my emerald silk robe, and walked casually toward the foyer. I unlatched the heavy deadbolt and swung the door open just as my father raised his fist to strike the wood again. He froze, his arms suspended in the air. He was clearly taken aback by my absolute calm demeanor and the sheer breathtaking scale of the foyer behind me, though his towering rage quickly blinded him to the luxurious details of my home. "What is wrong with you?" he screamed, pushing past me slightly to stand inside the entryway. "Your mother is having a severe panic attack in the car. Courtney is in absolute tears at the venue, and you are standing here in a bathrobe drinking coffee. Call your boss right now. I do not care what button you pressed or what system you messed up. Because you felt slighted, you are going to call your corporate office and reinstate that venue discount before I lose my mind." My mother stepped into the doorway beside him, pointing a shaking manicured finger directly at my face. "After everything we have done for you," she hissed. "We put clothes on your back, we fed you, we raised you, and this is how you repay us, by trying to publicly humiliate your own sister on the most important day of her life." "I did not humiliate anyone," I replied, my voice dangerously soft and perfectly steady. "I simply read your text message. You made it abundantly clear that my presence was not required because I am not real family and I do not fit your aesthetic. I just adjusted the financial arrangements to accurately reflect your decision. It is a corporate perk, my father yelled, the veins in his neck bulging against his collar. You owe this family your loyalty. Call your manager and tell them it was an accounting error. Tell them to turn that credit card back on immediately so they can start setting up the flowers. I leaned against the doorframe looking at them, not as my parents, but as two desperate strangers who had finally run out of other people's money. There is no manager to call Dad, and there is no corporate perk. You wanted an exclusive wedding for real family only. Well, real family pays full price. My mother let out a sharp gasp, her face twisting in pure, unadulterated hatred. You selfish, ungrateful little brat, she spat. You are going to ruin this entire family over a petty grudge. No, I corrected her smoothly. You ruined yourselves by pretending to be something you are not. My father stepped forward, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He was trying to use physical intimidation, a tactic that used to terrify me when I was a teenager living under his roof. But looking at him now, he just looked pathetic, old, and out of breath. Fine, he snarled, his voice dropping to a vicious, venomous whisper. If you want to play hardball, we will play hardball. I am driving straight from this building to the regional bank. I am going to take out a massive second mortgage on the suburban house. I will pull every single ounce of equity out of that property to pay for this wedding in cash today. He pointed a finger mere inches from my nose. And let me make this crystal clear, Rebecca. The moment I sign those bank papers, I am driving to my lawyer's office. You will be completely disinherited. You will not see a single dime of our estate, and I will make sure you are dead to this family forever. I stared at my father's shaking finger, almost feeling sorry for his profound ignorance. Disinherited. You cannot disinherit someone from a bankrupt estate. But I kept my face entirely blank. I simply stepped back, placed my hand on the heavy oak door, and told them to leave my property before I called building security. They stormed out, my mother cursing my name all the way down the hallway. I locked the door, walked back to the kitchen, and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. I knew the explosion was only just beginning. Across town, the situation at the locked gates of the Apex Country Club was rapidly deteriorating. Desmond had just arrived in his sleek black sedan, expecting to meet his future wife for a joyous walkthrough of their reception space. Desmond was a man who valued integrity above almost everything else. Coming from a highly respected, affluent black family in Atlanta, he was raised with strict principles regarding honesty, legacy, and family honor. When he pulled into the circular driveway and saw Courtney sitting inside her mother's parked SUV, sobbing hysterically into her hands, he immediately rushed to her side. He opened the passenger door, his face etched with deep concern. Courtney threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his expensive suit jacket. Between loud theatrical sobs, she began spinning a masterful web of deceit. She told Desmond that I was going through a severe mental health crisis. She claimed I had always been deeply jealous of her, resentful of her beauty, and her perfect relationship. According to Courtney, my jealousy had finally pushed me over the edge. She lied right to his face, telling him that I had maliciously hacked into my mother's corporate accounts and canceled the venue payment out of pure spite, just to sabotage the happiest day of her life. Desmond listened to her carefully, his protective instincts kicking in. He did not know me very well. My family had intentionally kept me away from him during their entire courtship, feeding him a fabricated narrative that I was an estranged, bitter workaholic who refused to participate in family events. Believing the woman he was about to marry, Desmond decided to handle the situation directly. He wanted to resolve the conflict honorably and protect his future wife from any further emotional distress. He stepped away from the SUV, pulled out his phone, and dialed my number. Back in my penthouse, I saw his name flash across my screen. I answered the call on the first ring, my voice perfectly calm. "Hello, Desmond." "Hello?" "Rebecca," he started, his tone polite but unmistakably firm. "I know you and your sister have a complicated history, and I know you have been struggling lately. But this has gone way too far. Courtney is sitting here in tears. You need to stop harassing her and let the club process the payment. If you are dealing with mental health issues, we can get you the help you need after the wedding. But trying to sabotage our venue out of spite is completely unacceptable. I listened to his entire speech without interrupting. I did not get angry. I did not raise my voice, and I certainly did not try to defend myself against Courtney's ridiculous accusations of mental instability. I felt a brief wave of pity for him. He was a good man trapped in a family of professional con artists. Desmond, you are a smart man, I said softly, letting the silence hang for a split second before delivering the absolute truth. You were raised by brilliant people. So, I want you to ask yourself a very logical question. Why will your wealthy fiancé never show you her actual bank statements? And more importantly, why does a family with such immense supposed wealth need to use their mentally unstable sister's credit card to pay the deposit for your wedding? The line went completely dead quiet. I could practically hear the gears turning in Desmond's head as my words collided with months of tiny, unexplained red flags he had undoubtedly noticed but brushed aside. Desmond stood perfectly still on the pavement, staring blankly at the locked doors of the country club. My question echoed in his mind, shattering the perfect illusion Courtney had built. He slowly lowered the phone from his ear, his eyes shifting back to the SUV. Courtney was no longer crying. The theatrical tears had vanished instantly. She was staring at him through the open car door, her face completely pale. Realizing that the conversation was not going the way she had planned, pure panic flashed in her eyes. She lunged forward out of the passenger seat, her hands desperately reaching out to snatch his phone away from him. Desmond easily sidestepped her frantic lunge. He looked at the woman he was supposed to marry in less than 48 hours, seeing her truly for the first time. The perfectly polished facade had cracked wide open, revealing the desperate manipulative reality underneath. He did not yell or cause a public scene. He simply put his phone in his pocket, adjusted his suit jacket, and told Courtney he needed some time away to review his own financial security. Without another word, he walked back to his sedan, got in, and drove away, leaving Courtney standing entirely alone on the pavement outside the locked country club. She immediately dialed my mother, hyperventilating, as she confessed that Desmond was starting to ask for actual bank statements. My mother, sitting in the passenger seat of their parked SUV across town, realized her entire house of cards was rapidly collapsing. The venue was locked, the credit card was frozen, and now the wealthy groom was getting suspicious. She knew that if the wedding was officially canceled, the entire extended family would demand answers. She needed to strike first and control the narrative. She needed a scapegoat to absorb the incoming shockwave of humiliation. And as always, I was her favorite target. She opened the Facebook app on her phone and began typing a furious public status update, tagging dozens of family members, family friends, and even some of Desmond's relatives. I did not have to guess what she wrote because my phone immediately started vibrating off the kitchen counter. I unlocked the screen and saw the massive block of text dominating my social media feed. It was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation and victim playing. My mother wrote, "It absolutely breaks my heart to share this publicly, but we are dealing with a severe family crisis today. Our oldest daughter, Rebecca, has suffered a complete psychological breakdown. Out of pure spite and jealousy over Courtney finding true love, Rebecca has maliciously used her low-level corporate access to illegally cancel the wedding venue. Even worse, she has stolen the family funds we specifically set aside for this beautiful day, freezing our accounts to hold us hostage. We are praying for her mental health, but we are completely devastated that she would try to destroy her own sister's happiness just because she is incapable of finding her own. Please send prayers for our sweet Courtney during this absolute nightmare." Within 10 minutes, the comments section became a digital firing squad. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who had not bothered to speak to me in 5 years were suddenly outraged experts on my character. My private text messages exploded next. Aunt Joanne sent a massive paragraph calling me a bitter, ungrateful monster who was tearing the family apart for no reason. My cousin Michael texted me saying I was dead to the entire bloodline and that I belonged in a psychiatric ward. The notifications poured in relentlessly, a non-stop chorus of misdirected outrage from people who had no idea they were actively defending a family of financial frauds. 10 years ago, this kind of coordinated public shaming would have broken my spirit. I would have called my mother in tears, begging her to take the post down, apologizing and agreeing to whatever financial demands she made just to make the public humiliation stop. But today, standing in my penthouse, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical focus. By publicly accusing me of corporate embezzlement and theft, my mother had just crossed the line from toxic family dynamics into actionable, documented libel. I did not reply to a single comment. I did not text Aunt Joanne back to defend myself. I simply held down the side buttons on my phone, taking high-resolution screenshots of the original post, every single defamatory comment, and every aggressive text message. I walked over to my home office, sat down at my mahogany desk, and opened my laptop. I drafted a new email to my lead corporate attorney, a ruthless litigator named Jonathan. I attached all 40 screenshots to the file, documenting the exact timestamps and the sheer scale of the defamation. Then I picked up my phone and called his direct line. He answered immediately, already aware of the country club venue cancellation from the corporate side. "Jonathan," I said smoothly, my voice perfectly level, as I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. My mother just published a fabricated statement to over 500 people, claiming I committed corporate embezzlement and grand larceny. Draft the cease and desist, but more importantly, finalize the eviction notice for the suburban property. While Jonathan set the legal machinery in motion to strip them of their final safety net, my family was forced to host the rehearsal dinner they could no longer afford. The grand event was originally scheduled to take place in the private tasting room of the country club, featuring a custom 5-course menu and imported wine. Instead, with their corporate guarantor revoked and their credit cards completely maxed out, my mother had to desperately scramble. She managed to secure a cramped back room at a loud mid-tier Italian chain restaurant located right off the interstate highway. The atmosphere was a stark contrast to the luxurious illusion they had sold to Desmond's family. Neon beer signs buzzed on the walls. The tables were covered in cheap paper tablecloths, and the smell of heavy garlic and fried cheese permeated the air. At 7 o'clock, Desmond arrived with his parents, Wallace and Beatrice. They walked into the noisy restaurant looking like royalty who had accidentally wandered into a circus. Wallace, a highly successful corporate attorney, wore a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit, while Beatrice was dressed in understated designer silk. They stood in the doorway of the private dining room, taking in the sticky menus and plastic water pitchers with visible confusion. Desmond walked in right behind them, his face an unreadable mask. Ever since the confrontation outside the locked country club that morning, he had been completely distant. He sat at the far end of the long table, barely speaking to Courtney, who was trying frantically to hold his hand and act like everything was perfectly normal. My mother immediately launched into her rehearsed performance, overcompensating for the humiliating venue downgrade with a loud, shrill laugh. She rushed over to Beatrice, waving her hands dramatically. "I am so incredibly sorry for this rustic little detour, Beatrice," she said, forcing a massive fake smile. "There was an absolute disaster at the country club this afternoon. A main plumbing pipe burst right over the private dining room. The entire floor is flooded. We had to pivot at the very last second, and Courtney just loves the charming, homey feel of this little local place." Beatrice offered a polite, tight-lipped smile, taking her seat gracefully without touching the basket of greasy breadsticks placed in front of her. "Oh, what a shame," she replied diplomatically. "We were very much looking forward to seeing the venue. I hope they have the plumbing resolved before the ceremony tomorrow." My mother nodded enthusiastically, lying through her teeth. "Oh, absolutely. They assured me the maintenance team is working through the night. Everything will be perfect for the wedding." But Wallace was not buying a single word of it. As a corporate lawyer who dealt with high-stakes contracts and elite establishments daily, his mind immediately picked apart the glaring inconsistencies in my mother's story. He knew exactly how the Apex Hospitality Group operated. If a premier country club suffered a catastrophic plumbing failure, they would immediately relocate their VIP clients to one of their sister properties in the city, fully comped. They would never abandon a wedding party and force them to eat at a highway chain restaurant. He kept his suspicions to himself, but his sharp eyes began to heavily scrutinize the other side of the table, specifically focusing on my father. Richard was completely falling apart in real time. He sat rigidly in his chair, his face a sickly, pale color, sweating profusely through his cheap dress shirt. He was not eating. He was just chugging glass after glass of ice water, his eyes constantly darting down to his cell phone, resting next to his fork. He knew the country club was not flooded. He knew the wedding was currently suspended, the floral trucks were gone, and the venue was demanding a $150,000 wire transfer by noon the next day. His entire life hinged on securing a massive emergency second mortgage on the suburban house. He had spent the entire afternoon begging the regional bank manager to expedite the paperwork. Suddenly, the screen of my father's phone lit up with an incoming call from the bank. Richard gasped softly, grabbing the phone with trembling hands. He abruptly pushed his chair back, the wooden legs screeching loudly against the tile floor, drawing the attention of the entire table. "Excuse me," he mumbled frantically, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "A major business call. I have to take this outside." He practically ran out of the room, pushing past a waiter carrying a tray of pasta. He burst through the emergency exit door at the end of the hallway, stumbling out into the dark, damp alleyway beside the restaurant dumpsters. The loud hum of the interstate traffic roared in the background. He answered the phone, his voice shaking with pure desperation. "Please tell me you have the approval," he begged the loan officer. "I need that cash wired into my account first thing tomorrow morning, or my family is ruined." The voice on the other end of the line was completely devoid of sympathy, preparing to deliver a piece of devastating news that would permanently destroy the last pillar of their fake reality. The loan officer stated his next words with a voice completely devoid of emotion. "There is no approval for your application. In fact, your application has been immediately flagged by our fraud department." Richard leaned against the cold brick wall of the alley, his chest heaving as he nervously loosened his silk tie. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "There is no fraud. I am requesting a standard cash-out refinance on my primary residence. I have hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity sitting in that house. The property is located in one of the most exclusive zip codes in the state. I just need a rush order on the paperwork so I can wire $150,000 tomorrow morning." "Sir," the banker replied, the clicking of a computer keyboard audible over the line. "I am looking directly at the Master County property records. You do not own that house. You cannot take out a second mortgage on a property that does not belong to you." Richard let out a short, frantic bark of laughter. The neon light from the beer sign buzzed loudly above him. "You are looking at the wrong file," he snapped, his panic making him aggressive. "I have lived in that house for 30 years. My wife and I raised our daughters in that house. The deed is in my name. Check the system again." "I have checked the system 3 times, Richard," the banker said coldly. "The deed was in your name until exactly 36 months ago. At that time, the property was seized by this very institution. It was sold at a public foreclosure auction to satisfy a massive accumulation of outstanding gambling debts and multiple defaulted personal loans that you deliberately hid from your family." Richard stopped breathing. The sound of the interstate traffic seemed to completely fade away, leaving only the deafening roar of his own heartbeat in his ears. For 3 years, he had managed to keep his gambling addiction a complete secret from my mother and Courtney. He had intercepted the mail, burned the warning letters, and maxed out credit cards to maintain the illusion of their upper-class lifestyle. But he had always assumed the bank was just incredibly slow to process the final paperwork. He thought he had outsmarted them. "That is impossible," Richard whispered, his knees suddenly feeling incredibly weak. He slid down the brick wall until he was crouching next to the dumpsters, his expensive suit dragging on the dirty pavement. If the bank foreclosed on my house 3 years ago, why the hell am I still living in it? Why did the sheriff not show up to drag my family out onto the lawn? I never received a single eviction notice. Not one piece of paper. The banker let out a heavy sigh, sounding completely exhausted by the conversation. Because the bank does not own the property anymore, Richard. The house was purchased in full in cash by a private commercial entity at the public auction. Upon clearing the title, the new ownership group submitted a legally binding directive to our foreclosure department. They explicitly instructed us to halt all standard eviction proceedings. They allowed you and your family to remain on the premises as rent-free tenants. They have been quietly absorbing all property taxes, municipal water bills, and structural maintenance costs for the past 3 years. You have been living on their charity. Richard stared at the dirty concrete beneath his expensive leather shoes. His mind raced frantically, trying to process this impossible information. Who would buy a multi-million-dollar property and let the bankrupt previous owners live there for free? Who would pay their taxes without ever sending a single letter or demanding a dime in rent? He gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles turning completely white. Who bought it? Richard demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and disbelief. Give me the name of the buyer right now. I have a right to know who my landlord is. Sir, that information is part of the public county register, the banker replied. I can give you the name of the holding company. The property is currently owned by a corporate trust registered under Apex Real Estate Holdings. The phone slipped from Richard's sweaty palm and clattered loudly against the pavement. He did not bother to pick it up. He just sat there in the dark, damp alleyway, staring blankly at the brick wall. Apex Real Estate Holdings. It was the exact same corporate entity that managed the country club. It was the exact same company that my mother had been cursing all afternoon. It was the company they all believed I worked for as a low-level event coordinator. The crushing, undeniable truth finally crashed over him like a tidal wave. I was not just an employee, I was the owner. I owned the company, I owned the country club, and for the last 3 years I had secretly owned the very roof over their heads. He realized with sudden, horrifying clarity exactly what his wife had done. Brenda had just spent the entire morning screaming at the only person holding their entire fragile existence together. She had kicked me out of the wedding, threatened me, and publicly defamed me on the internet, completely unaware that I had the power to render them homeless with a single phone call. Richard grabbed his phone from the ground with shaking hands, knowing he had to get back inside the restaurant immediately to stop his wife from doing any more damage. Richard scrambled up from the dirty pavement, his expensive suit pants stained with grease and alley water. He shoved his phone into his pocket and sprinted toward the heavy metal emergency exit door. He had to get back inside the restaurant immediately. He had to grab his wife by the shoulders, pull her out of that room, and physically stop her from posting another word on social media. He needed to make her understand that the daughter they had been abusing and mocking all day was currently holding the deed to their entire existence. But Richard was entirely too late. The legal machinery I had set in motion earlier that afternoon was already arriving at the table. Back inside the cramped private dining room, the atmosphere was suffocating. Desmond sat silently at the end of the table, his demeanor freezing cold. His parents, Wallace and Beatrice, politely picked at their appetizers, their trained eyes observing every single crack in my family's wealthy facade. Courtney was drinking her third glass of wine, her hands shaking slightly as she desperately tried to force Desmond into conversation. My mother was doing what she did best, aggressively steering the dialogue, talking loudly about the extravagant floral arrangements arriving tomorrow and the elite guest list she had curated. Just as a waiter approached to clear the salad plates, a man in a plain gray windbreaker walked directly into the private dining area. The restaurant hostess tried to step in front of him, frantically whispering that this was a closed event, but the man bypassed her completely. He was a professional process server, and he did not care about social etiquette or rehearsal dinners. He walked straight up to the head of the table, his eyes scanning the faces of the guests before locking directly onto my mother. "Are you Brenda and Richard?" The man asked, his voice loud and authoritative, completely cutting off my mother mid-sentence. My mother sat up straight, instantly annoyed by the interruption, but forcing a tight, patronizing smile for the sake of Desmond's parents. "Richard just stepped out to take a very important business call," she said smoothly. "I am Brenda. Are you from the country club? Did Mr. Mitchell send you with the revised vendor manifests and a formal apology for the plumbing issue?" The man did not smile. He did not introduce himself or confirm her ridiculous assumption. He simply reached inside his windbreaker, pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila envelope, and dropped it squarely onto the table right next to her plate of garlic bread. "You have been served," the man stated loudly. He immediately turned around and walked out of the restaurant without another word. The entire table fell completely silent. Wallace, a veteran corporate attorney, instantly recognized the exact phrasing and demeanor of a legal process server. He slowly set down his water glass, his sharp eyes fixed entirely on the thick envelope. Beatrice exchanged a quick, knowing glance with her husband. Desmond did not move a muscle, but his jaw tightened. My mother let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh, desperately trying to salvage the moment. "Oh, the country club management must be taking this plumbing liability very seriously," she lied, her hands fluttering over the envelope. "They probably sent over a non-disclosure agreement and a discount offer. Let me just take a quick look." She ripped open the seal and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. She expected to see a catering contract. Instead, the bold black letters at the top of the very first page screamed at her. 24-hour notice to quit, formal eviction and lockout order. Her heart violently slammed against her ribs. She blinked rapidly, thinking her eyes were playing tricks on her. She scanned down the page, reading the address of the beautiful suburban house she had bragged about all evening. And then her eyes landed on the name of the legal plaintiff, the sole property owner executing the eviction, Rebecca. The blood completely drained from my mother's face. The paper shook violently in her trembling hands. The luxurious world she had built entirely on lies was collapsing right in front of her future in-laws. She was not a wealthy socialite. She was a delinquent tenant about to be thrown onto the street by the very daughter she had just publicly crucified. "Is everything all right, Brenda?" Wallace asked, his voice deep, calm, and incredibly piercing. "You look like you just saw a ghost." My mother gasped, shoving the papers recklessly into her expensive designer handbag, nearly knocking over her wine glass in the process. "Oh yes, everything is perfectly fine," she stammered, her voice pitching up an octave. "Just a silly clerical error from our accountant regarding a minor tax filing. Absolutely nothing to worry about." At that exact moment, Richard burst through the dining room doors. He was hyperventilating, his hair disheveled, his suit ruined. He stared wildly at my mother. He saw the sheer panic in her eyes and the edge of the manila envelope sticking out of her bag. He knew instantly that the absolute worst had happened. My mother looked back at him, her mind spiraling into dark criminal desperation. She realized they were officially homeless by tomorrow morning. The only way to save Courtney's marriage to this wealthy family, the only way to maintain their fake status, was to pay the venue the $150,000 right now. She had to secure the country club before Desmond's family found out the truth. Desmond pushed his chair back politely, excusing himself to use the restroom. He stood up and walked away, leaving his tailored suit jacket draped over the back of his chair. My mother's eyes instantly darted to the jacket. She knew Desmond carried an exclusive American Express Centurion card in his inner breast pocket. Driven by pure narcissistic panic and the threat of total public ruin, she made a fatal, illegal decision that would destroy her life forever. Desmond's footsteps faded down the tiled hallway toward the restrooms. My mother sat completely still for 3 seconds, her eyes locked onto the dark charcoal fabric of his tailored suit jacket draped over the chair next to Courtney. Across the table, Wallace and Beatrice had turned their attention entirely to my father. Richard was aggressively drinking his ice water. his hands shaking so violently the ice clinked against the glass. He was desperately trying to deflect Wallace's piercing legal questions about his supposed real estate portfolio, terrified that his secret eviction was about to be exposed right there over appetizers. The distraction was absolutely perfect. My mother shifted her weight, sliding her chair an inch closer to Desmond's empty seat. She did not hesitate. Her manicured hand slipped silently inside the inner breast pocket of the jacket. Her fingers wrapped around the smooth Italian leather of his wallet. She pulled it down onto her lap beneath the edge of the cheap paper tablecloth. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, not out of guilt, but out of the sheer adrenaline of self-preservation. She opened the wallet and immediately found what she was looking for. The American Express Centurion card. The infamous black card made of solid anodized titanium. It was heavy cold and represented unlimited purchasing power. In her deeply twisted narcissistic mind, she was not committing a federal felony. She was simply advancing funds from her future son-in-law. She rationalized that once Courtney and Desmond said their vows in less than 48 hours, their assets would be merged anyway. It was family money. She was just taking a temporary, undocumented loan to protect the family name from public disgrace. With lightning speed, she pulled her smartphone from her designer purse. She opened the camera application, double-checked that the flash was turned off, and snapped a high-resolution photograph of the front of the card. She flipped the heavy metal over and photographed the security code on the back. As she slipped the card back into the leather slot, she felt eyes on her. She looked up. Courtney was staring directly at her mother's lap. Courtney had seen the entire thing. She saw the titanium card. She saw the camera screen. For a split second, a flash of genuine panic crossed my sister's face. She knew exactly what our mother was doing. She knew it was identity theft and grand larceny. She knew that if Desmond ever found out the relationship and the lavish lifestyle she craved would be instantly terminated. But Courtney was a product of my mother's toxic environment. She looked away from the wallet and stared at her own reflection in the dark window of the restaurant. She wanted her custom floral arrangements. She wanted her imported champagne. She wanted the status and the aesthetic of the country club wedding more than she cared about starting a marriage built on trust and honesty. Courtney took a sip of her wine, tightly closed her eyes, and gave my mother a barely perceptible nod. The silent agreement was sealed in blood. My mother slipped the wallet back into the breast pocket of the jacket just as Desmond walked back into the private dining room. He sat down completely oblivious to the fact that his financial security had just been compromised by the two women smiling sweetly at him across the table. The rest of the rehearsal dinner was a blur of fake laughter and immense underlying tension. Richard looked like he was on the verge of a medical emergency, while my mother practically vibrated with the arrogant confidence of someone who believed she had just outsmarted everyone in the room. They said their polite goodbyes in the restaurant parking lot. Desmond left in his sedan, while my family piled into their leased SUV to drive back to the house they no longer owned. The car ride home was dead silent. Richard gripped the steering wheel, his mind consumed by the eviction notice waiting for them. My mother just stared out the window, a smug smile playing on her lips, firmly believing she had solved all their problems. Fast forward to Saturday morning, the day of the wedding. The sun rose over the Chicago skyline, casting a bright golden glow over the city. Inside the master bedroom of the suburban house, my mother was already fully dressed in her expensive mother-of-the-bride gown. She paced the length of the bedroom, clutching her phone in one hand and staring at the photographs of Desmond's credit card in her digital gallery. The strict deadline was 8 o'clock in the morning. She had to authorize the $150,000 charge before the floral trucks officially canceled their route and the venue was dismantled. She took a deep breath, puffed out her chest with misplaced authority, and dialed the direct line to the Apex Country Club billing department. It was time to process the payment and secure her perfect day. When the billing department informed my mother over the phone that a manual override of a $150,000 charge required an in-person signature on the venue premises, she did not panic. She simply grabbed her keys, threw Courtney into the passenger seat, and drove straight to the Apex Country Club. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the grand lobby of the exclusive venue was completely devoid of life. It was supposed to be a hive of chaotic wedding preparation. There should have been caterers rushing through the double doors with silver trays, florists assembling towering archways of white orchids, and lighting technicians testing the chandeliers in the main ballroom. Instead, the building was shrouded in the hollow, echoing silence of a permanently canceled event. Courtney stood in the center of the lobby, wearing a silk robe with the word bride embroidered in cursive on the back. Her hair was only half styled in loose curls, and her face was a mask of absolute terror as she stared into the dark, empty ballroom. Desmond and his affluent parents were scheduled to arrive for pre-wedding photographs in exactly 2 hours. At the front mahogany concierge desk, my mother was leaning aggressively over the marble counter, practically screaming at Mr. Mitchell. She had her smartphone unlocked and slammed face up on the desk, displaying the brightly lit photograph of Desmond's stolen American Express Centurion card. "Type the numbers exactly as I read them from this photograph," my mother demanded, tapping her manicured fingernail harshly against the glass screen. "It is an American Express Centurion card. There is absolutely no limit. My future son-in-law is currently tied up in an urgent morning business meeting and sent me his personal card details to handle this minor inconvenience. Run it for the full $150,000 right now so we can get those delivery trucks backed up to the loading dock immediately." Mr. Mitchell stood behind his computer terminal, his posture stiff and uncomfortable. "Ma'am, manual entry of a credit card that is not physically present for insertion requires a signed authorization form and a matching photo identification from the primary card holder," he explained evenly, trying to maintain protocol. "I am the mother of the bride," she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the marble pillars. "I will sign whatever liability form you need. Do you really want your management team to find out you lost a 6-figure contract over a petty technicality? Run the numbers right now, or I will make sure you never work in luxury hospitality again." Intimidated by her sheer volume and the threat of a massive lost commission, Mr. Mitchell reluctantly let out a heavy sigh. He pulled up the secure payment gateway on his monitor and hovered his hands over the keyboard. He glanced down at the photograph on my mother's phone and began to type the first 4 digits of Desmond's stolen card. Just as his index finger moved to strike the next key, the massive, heavy oak double doors of the country club lobby swung open with a loud, authoritative crash. The bright morning sunlight flooded into the dim room, casting long shadows across the polished floor. I stepped over the threshold, but I was not wearing a bridesmaid dress. I was dressed immaculately in a razor-sharp, custom-tailored charcoal designer suit, a crisp white silk blouse, and black stilettos that clicked methodically against the marble with every step I took. I was not alone. Flanking my right side was Jonathan, my lead corporate litigator, carrying a thick leather briefcase. On my left was an associate attorney holding a stack of printed financial ledgers. Walking slightly ahead of us was a towering private security guard in a dark suit, his eyes scanning the room with professional intensity. My mother whipped her head around at the sound of the doors. When she saw me, her face instantly contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "What the hell are you doing here?" she screamed, abandoning the front desk and taking 2 aggressive steps toward me. "You were explicitly disinvited from this property. You are not a part of this family, and you have absolutely no right to be here to ruin your sister's day. Security removed this jealous brat immediately before I call the police." I did not stop walking. I did not even look at her. I walked straight past my screaming mother and my trembling sister, projecting an aura of absolute untouchable authority. I approached the mahogany concierge desk and stopped directly in front of Mr. Mitchell. The seasoned general manager took one look at me, immediately dropped his hands away from the keyboard, and stepped out from behind the desk. He smoothed the lapels of his suit jacket, bowed his head slightly in a gesture of profound respect, and spoke loudly enough for the entire lobby to hear. "Good morning, Madam CEO. We held the setup exactly as you instructed." The lobby fell into an absolute suffocating silence. My mother stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, The aggressive pointing of her finger halted mid-air. Courtney let out a small, confused gasp, clutching the lapels of her silk bridal robe. They both stared at Mr. Mitchell, fully expecting him to burst into laughter and declare this a practical joke. When the seasoned manager maintained his respectful posture toward me, the fragile reality my mother had constructed began to violently shatter in real time. "No," my mother shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unhinged desperation. She turned her wild eyes toward the private security guard standing by my side. "Remove her right now. I am a paying client and I demand that you remove this delusional woman from the premises immediately. She does not own anything, she is lying to you." Before my security guard could even blink, the heavy front doors swung open once again. The morning sunlight poured into the lobby as Desmond stepped inside, looking incredibly sharp in a tailored black tuxedo. Right behind him were Wallace and Beatrice, both dressed to absolute perfection for the pre-wedding photographs they were scheduled to take in the courtyard gardens. They stopped dead in their tracks, taking in the chaotic scene. They saw my mother screaming like a trapped animal, my sister trembling in her white robe, and me standing calmly in the center of the room, flanked by a highly intimidating legal team. Desmond looked at Courtney, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. "Courtney, what is going on here?" he asked, his deep voice echoing across the massive marble space. My mother immediately spun around, pasting on a frantic, horrifyingly fake smile that barely masked her sheer terror. "Desmond, thank goodness you are here early," she practically panted, rushing toward him with outstretched arms. "We are just dealing with a minor security breach. Rebecca showed up uninvited and is trying to cause a scene because she is incredibly unwell. I was just having the staff escort her out so we can begin the photographs and enjoy this beautiful day." I did not let her finish. I completely ignored her frantic, pathetic attempts to command the room. I walked with slow, deliberate steps toward the large glass coffee table situated directly between my family and Desmond's family. The sharp click of my stilettos commanded the absolute attention of everyone present. Wallace, with his finely tuned corporate lawyer instincts, was already analyzing my expensive designer attire and the thick briefcases my attorneys were carrying. He knew instantly that I was not a mentally unstable sister having a random psychological breakdown. I was a highly successful professional executing a calculated, lethal legal maneuver. I stopped right in front of Desmond. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of anger. I reached into the leather bag held by my associate attorney, retrieved a thick, heavy financial folder, and dropped it squarely onto the glass table. The loud smack of the heavy paper hitting the glass made Courtney physically flinch and take a step backward. "Desmond," I said, my voice perfectly level and echoing with cold, undeniable authority. "My mother told you I was an unstable, jealous employee who hacked a computer system out of spite. The truth is, I own this club. I own the entire Apex Hospitality Group. I canceled their contract because they expected me to secretly fund this entire $150,000 wedding on my corporate account, all while officially disinviting me via text message last night to make room for your extended family." Desmond stared at me, his face an unreadable mask of profound shock. I opened the folder and spread the official documents out across the glass table for him and his parents to clearly see. "They told you they were independently wealthy," I continued smoothly, looking directly into Desmond's eyes. "But every single luxury you see here was paid for by me. When they realized I had permanently revoked my financial guarantee, they tried to frame me as a crazy, bitter woman to cover up the fact that they are completely broke. My mother told me I did not fit the aesthetic of this venue. She was right. I do not fit the aesthetic of a fake socialite because I am the landlord who actually owns the building." Beatrice stepped forward, her elegant posture stiffening as she looked down at the highlighted financial ledgers and the printed copy of the cruel text message my mother had sent me. She slowly raised her eyes and looked at my mother with a level of absolute, unadulterated disgust that could have frozen boiling water. The affluent matriarch of the Atlanta family realized her son was being tricked into marrying a family of deceitful parasites. My mother tried to stammer out a defense, reaching a shaking hand toward Desmond's arm, but he pulled away instantly, as if her touch would burn him. The entire facade had been brutally ripped away, exposing their pathetic lies to the exact people they were trying so desperately to impress. But the public humiliation was only just beginning, because the real explosion had yet to come. Desmond did not immediately scream or react with explosive anger. He was a man raised in a household where composure was a weapon. He slowly stepped away from the glass table, his dark eyes shifting from the highlighted financial ledgers to the mahogany concierge desk where my mother had been standing just moments prior. The venue manager, Mr. Mitchell, had stepped back, leaving my mother's smartphone and a bright yellow post-it note resting on the polished wood. Desmond walked over to the desk with terrifying, deliberate precision. My mother tried to physically block his path, her hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender, but he simply brushed past her without making eye contact. He looked down at the desk. The post-it note was covered in my mother's frantic, aggressive handwriting. It listed a 16-digit number, an expiration date, and a 4-digit security code. Desmond reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out his sleek leather wallet. He opened it, his face turning entirely to stone. The physical Centurion card was still safely tucked inside, but the numbers written in blue ink on the yellow paper were an exact, perfect match. Before Desmond could even turn around to demand an explanation, the deafening silence of the grand lobby was shattered by a sharp, vibrating buzz. It was coming from Desmond's right pocket. He pulled out his smartphone. The bright screen illuminated his face. Everyone in the room watched his expression shift from profound shock to absolute terrifying fury. It was an automated text message from the American Express High Security Fraud Division. He read the notification aloud, his voice devoid of any warmth. Urgent fraud alert. Attempted manual entry of $150,000 at Apex Country Club. Reply yes to authorize or no to decline and report stolen card. Wallace, recognizing the gravity of the situation, stepped up beside his son. A corporate attorney to his core, Wallace looked at the post-it note, then at the glowing screen of his son's phone, and finally at my mother. He realized instantly that this was not just a pathetic lie about social status. This was a documented federal felony playing out in real time. My mother began to hyperventilate, stumbling backward until her back hit the marble wall. Desmond did not address my mother. He completely ignored her frantic apologies and her desperate attempts to explain the situation as a simple misunderstanding. Instead, he turned his entire body toward Courtney. My sister was standing near the grand staircase, her hands gripping the silk fabric of her bridal robe so tightly her knuckles were completely white. Desmond closed the distance between them with 3 long strides. He stopped mere inches from her face, his towering presence casting a dark shadow over her perfect white aesthetic. He did not yell. His voice dropped to a dangerously low, chilling whisper that carried across the quiet marble lobby. "Did you let your mother steal my credit card details?" he asked. The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Courtney looked at his terrifyingly calm face, then glanced at Wallace and Beatrice, who were watching her with expressions of absolute disgust. She knew she was trapped. The photographic evidence was sitting right there on the concierge desk, completely undeniable. She could not gaslight her way out of a bank security alert. The golden child persona instantly shattered into a million pieces. Courtney collapsed to her knees right there on the pristine marble floor, her perfectly styled hair falling into her tear-streaked face. She burst into loud, ugly sobs, immediately sacrificing the very woman who had enabled her entire life. "It was not my idea," she wailed, pointing a shaking finger directly at our mother. "Mom did it. She took pictures of your wallet at the rehearsal dinner when you went to the bathroom. She told me it was just a temporary loan to save the wedding. She forced me to keep quiet, Desmond. I swear she forced me." My mother gasped loudly, clutching her chest, as if she had been physically shot by her favorite daughter's ultimate betrayal. Desmond stepped back from Courtney, his face twisting in absolute physical repulsion. He looked at the crying woman on the floor, as if she were a complete stranger. You sat at a table with my parents, watched your mother commit grand larceny against me, and smiled in my face. He said, his voice dripping with pure venom. I will never marry into a family of thieves and liars. This wedding is completely over. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Courtney let out a guttural, agonizing scream. It was not a scream of heartbreak over losing the man she loved. It was the horrific sound of a fragile, entitled ego violently shattering into pieces. She crawled forward on the polished marble floor, her expensive white silk bridal robe dragging across the stone, and desperately reached out toward Wallace and Beatrice. Please, Wallace. Beatrice. Courtney sobbed, abandoning all decorum as she grasped at the air near their feet. It was just a temporary loan. I swear to you, we were going to pay it back right after the honeymoon. My mother just wanted everything to be absolutely perfect for Desmond. We did not want you to think we were poor. We just wanted to save face in front of your family. Beatrice looked down at her, her elegant features completely devoid of any human sympathy. She took a deliberate step backward, pulling the hem of her expensive silk dress away from Courtney's reaching hands, as if the very air around my sister was contaminated. You thought stealing from my son was preferable to being honest about your financial status? Beatrice said, her tone dripping with aristocratic disdain. You are not just poor in wealth, Courtney. You are utterly impoverished in character. Wallace stepped securely between his wife and the weeping bride. The sharp, analytical mind of the veteran corporate attorney took absolute control of the chaotic situation. He did not yell, which made his words infinitely more terrifying. He spoke with the cold, measured cadence of a judge delivering a guilty verdict. Do not dare categorize this as a temporary loan or a simple family misunderstanding, Wallace stated coldly, his deep voice slicing right through Courtney's hysterical sobbing. What your mother just attempted with your full knowledge and your silent complicit consent is grand larceny. It is identity theft. Attempting to manually process a $150,000 unauthorized charge across state lines using a stolen financial instrument constitutes federal wire fraud. These are serious felony crimes, Courtney. You are not a confused bride trying to save face. You are an active accomplice to a federal felony. Courtney choked on her tears, the severe legal terminology hitting her like physical blows to the stomach. She looked up at Desmond silently, pleading for him to step in to defend her against his father, to offer even a shred of the love he had promised her yesterday. But Desmond's face was entirely hardened. The warmth in his eyes was completely gone, replaced by a wall of protective ice. Wallace placed a firm hand on his son's broad shoulder. Desmond, we are leaving, right now. The venue manager has a legal obligation to report high-dollar credit card fraud attempted on his commercial premises. We are exiting this building before the police arrive, so you are not unnecessarily entangled in their criminal investigation. Desmond nodded once. He did not say goodbye. He did not offer Courtney a final look of pity. He simply turned his back on the woman he was supposed to marry in less than 24 hours and walked toward the heavy glass doors with his parents. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind them with a final echoing thud. The silence that followed their departure was absolutely deafening. The golden child, the perfect daughter, who had never been told no in her entire life, was left kneeling in the dirt on the floor of a locked venue with a permanently ruined reputation. Across the lobby, my mother was still slumped against the marble wall, clutching her chest and breathing in shallow, rapid gasps, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic failure of her master plan and the sudden realization that she might actually go to prison. Courtney slowly stood up. The pristine white silk of her bridal robe was ruined. Black mascara ran down her cheeks in thick, dark lines, destroying her flawless aesthetic. She looked around the empty lobby, realizing her wealthy future and her high society status were gone forever. The reality of her situation was too massive for her entitled mind to process, so her brain immediately sought a scapegoat. She turned her wild, bloodshot eyes toward me. "You planned this!" Courtney screamed, her voice cracking violently as she marched toward me, her fists clenched tightly at her sides. "You showed up here just to destroy my life. You could have just paid the bill. You have millions of dollars, and you could not even give me this one weekend. You are a jealous, hateful monster, and you ruined my life on purpose." My security guard immediately stepped forward, raising a large hand to intercept her, but I held up 2 fingers to wave him off. I did not need physical protection from a broken, spoiled child. I looked at her tear-streaked face, feeling absolutely no pity. "I did not steal a credit card." I replied, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "I did not lie about my wealth. I just stopped paying your bills. This is all you." Courtney stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently. Before she could attempt another baseless accusation, a new sound pierced the heavy tension in the grand lobby. It was the sharp wail of police sirens approaching rapidly down the private driveway. Flashing red and blue lights began reflecting off the marble floors. Desmond and his parents had just reached the vestibule when 2 police officers pushed through the front doors, blocking their exit. Mr. Mitchell stepped out from behind the concierge desk. "Officers," he called out, raising a hand. "I am the general manager." I triggered the silent commercial fraud alarm. The officers stepped fully into the room, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. They quickly assessed the bizarre scene. A woman in a ruined bridal robe crying hysterically. A wealthy family looking severely unimpressed. My corporate legal team standing in a disciplined formation. And my mother leaning against the wall hyperventilating. Who is the individual attempting to process a $150,000 charge on a card that does not belong to them? The taller officer asked, looking directly at Mr. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell pointed a steady finger directly at my mother. "That woman right there." She provided the numbers from a photograph on her personal cell phone and attempted to force me to run the transaction without a physical card present. My mother's survival instinct kicked in, distorted by her deeply ingrained narcissistic delusion. She pushed herself off the wall, aggressively smoothing the front of her expensive designer dress, and marched toward the officers with an air of misplaced superiority. "Excuse me, officers," my mother said, forcing a loud, condescending laugh. "There is absolutely no need for this dramatic display. I am Brenda, a highly respected member of this community. This is an exclusive venue, and we are simply dealing with a minor family miscommunication regarding my daughter's wedding deposit. There is no fraud taking place here. You can leave now." The officer did not look amused. He turned his attention to Desmond, who was still standing near the entrance. "Sir," the officer said, "the card number belongs to your account. Did you authorize this woman to charge $150,000 to your credit line this morning?" Desmond looked my mother dead in the eyes. His voice was loud, clear, and uncompromising. "I did not authorize a single cent. She stole my wallet at dinner last night, photographed my financial information without my consent, and attempted to process a fraudulent charge. I am willing to press full federal charges against her." My mother gasped, taking a physical step backward as the severe reality of his legal declaration hit her. "Desmond, please," she begged, her arrogant facade dissolving into pathetic panic. "We are family. You cannot do this to Courtney. You cannot ruin her special day." "Ma'am," the taller officer interrupted, his tone shifting into strict law enforcement protocol. "Based on the physical evidence on the desk, the manager's testimony, and the cardholder's statement, you are not free to leave. We need you to step outside and come down to the station for questioning regarding felony credit card fraud." My mother let out a horrific shriek, wildly, looking around the lobby for a way out. At that exact moment, the front doors flew open again. My father, Richard, burst into the lobby. He was completely out of breath, his tie undone, and sweat pouring down his flushed face. He had clearly broken multiple traffic laws, racing from the suburban house to stop her. "Richard," my mother screamed, her voice cracking with sheer terror as the officer stepped forward to firmly grasp her arm. Richard, do something right now. Call our lawyers, tell them who we are, tell them to back off, tell them we have the money to pay for this. Richard stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at the police officers holding his wife. He looked at Desmond and his affluent parents standing by the door in absolute disgust. He looked at Courtney crying in a ruined heap on the floor. Finally, his exhausted eyes landed directly on me. He did not try to yell at the police. The fight completely drained out of his body, leaving him looking like a hollow, broken old man. He slumped forward, his shoulders dropping in ultimate defeat. "We do not have any lawyers at all," Brenda Richard muttered, his voice carrying a devastating weight. "We do not have any money. We do not even have a house anymore. We are being evicted tomorrow morning because Rebecca owns the property, and the bank foreclosed on me exactly 3 years ago today." The entire lobby seemed to hold its collective breath. The taller police officer, still firmly gripping my mother's arm, stopped reading her the Miranda rights and looked at my father in complete bewilderment. My mother, who had just been screaming about her elite status and impeccable social standing, suddenly let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She lunged toward Richard, her manicured hands desperately grabbing at his ruined suit jacket. "Shut up, Richard," she hissed, her voice trembling with a toxic mixture of rage and terror. "Shut your mouth right now! Do not say another word in front of these people!" But Richard was completely beyond her control. The heavy burden of his 3-year secret had finally crushed whatever remaining pride he possessed. He gently but firmly pushed my mother's hands away from his chest. "It is over, Brenda," he said, his voice hollow and echoing off the marble pillars. "The bank manager told me everything. He told me the name of the commercial holding company that bought our house at the auction." He looked past my mother and locked his bloodshot eyes directly onto Courtney. My sister was still sitting on the cold marble floor, her ruined white silk robe pooled around her like a deflated parachute. "Courtney." My father choked out tears, finally spilling over his eyelashes and tracking down his flushed cheeks. "I am so sorry. We do not have a massive trust fund. I do not have a real estate portfolio. I lost my business years ago because of a severe gambling addiction that I successfully hid from you and your mother. I took out secret loans. I maxed out credit lines. I bet our entire future trying to win it all back, and I lost absolutely everything. The bank seized the house 3 years ago. We were going to be thrown out onto the street with nothing but the clothes on our backs." Courtney stared at him, her lips trembling. "But we live there," she whispered, her voice sounding like a terrified little girl. "We still live in the house. You bought me this designer robe. You promised to pay for this wedding. You told Desmond we were wealthy." Richard shook his head slowly, his shoulders shaking with heavy, pathetic sobs. "We only live there because of your sister." He pointed a shaking finger toward me. "When the property went to public auction, Rebecca used her own corporate funds to purchase the deed in cash. She instructed the bank to halt the eviction. She has been quietly paying the property taxes, the water bills, and the structural maintenance for 3 years. Every single time your mother demanded I buy you a new car or a designer handbag to keep up appearances, I was using the money we saved from living completely rent-free under Rebecca's roof." The devastating truth washed over Courtney like a bucket of ice water. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, frantically trying to piece together the shattered fragments of her identity. Her entire life, her unbearable arrogance, her constant belittling of my career, all of it was built on a foundation of absolute lies. She remembered mocking me for working late nights while she partied. She remembered calling my apartment small and pathetic. She was not a high society heiress. She was the broke daughter of a degenerate gambler living off the charity of the sister she despised. The country club, the imported orchids, the customized menu, none of it was hers. It all belonged to me. She looked down at her hands, realizing that even the expensive manicured nails she flaunted were essentially paid for by the woman she had explicitly disinvited from her own wedding. The police officers exchanged a heavy look. This tragic family confession did not negate the fact that a federal felony had been committed. The taller officer tightened his grip on my mother's arm and instructed his partner to bring the squad car around to the front portico. My mother began to cry loudly, the reality of the handcuffs finally breaking her narcissistic delusion. But Courtney did not look at our mother. She did not look at our broken father. In a display of sheer, terrifying entitlement that proved she was truly her mother's daughter, Courtney scrambled up from the marble floor. She wiped the smeared black mascara from her cheeks, took a deep breath, and turned her body entirely toward me. The vicious, hateful sneer she usually reserved for me was completely gone. In its place was a sickeningly sweet, manipulative smile. Rebecca Courtney said, her voice dripping with a sudden, desperate affection as she took a step toward me. "Rebecca, you are so incredibly successful. You own all of this. You have millions of dollars. You can fix this. Just tell the police it was a big misunderstanding. Pay off the country club invoice right now. Pay the police to go away. You can afford it. Please, sister, you have to save my wedding." I stared down at her tear-streaked face, letting the sheer unbelievable audacity of her request echo through the massive marble lobby. Even now, kneeling in the wreckage of her own arrogance, my sister did not see me as a human being. She did not see a sister she had deeply wronged. She only saw a bank account. She only saw an emergency escape hatch to rescue her from the consequences of her own horrific actions. The old version of me, the young woman desperate for a scrap of validation from her toxic family, might have reached for her checkbook. The old me might have paid the $150,000 just to make the screaming stop and restore the fragile peace. But that woman was dead. I looked at the three people who had made my entire life a miserable, exhausting trial. I looked at my mother, whose wrists were now being firmly held by a federal police officer. I looked at my father, a coward who had gambled away his home and let me pay his bills while he allowed his wife to publicly humiliate me. And I looked at Courtney, a spoiled, entitled adult throwing a tantrum because she finally had to live in reality. This was the ultimate test of my boundaries. I did not flinch. I did not bend down to comfort her. I stood perfectly straight, my posture radiating the absolute authority I had earned through years of relentless hard work. "I am not paying a single dime," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotional warmth. It was sharp and cold, cutting through the lobby like a newly sharpened blade. Courtney gasped, her eyes widening in genuine shock, as if I had just physically struck her. "But you have the money," she protested weakly, her hands dropping to her sides. "You are the CEO. You can just make this all go away." "I can make it go away for myself," I corrected her calmly. "I cannot make it go away for you. You cannot bribe federal law enforcement, Courtney. You cannot throw my money at the Atlanta family to make them forget that you sat at a dinner table and watched your mother commit grand larceny. You wanted to play the role of a wealthy socialite. Well, this is the cost of admission. You have to pay your own debts." I shifted my gaze away from my weeping sister and looked directly at my mother. She stopped fighting the police officer for a brief second, meeting my eyes. There was no apology in her expression, only a toxic, simmering resentment that her ultimate scapegoat had finally turned the tables on her. Less than 24 hours ago, I reminded her, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet room, so the officers and the management staff could hear every single word. "You sent me a text message in the middle of the night. You explicitly banned me from this venue. You said that my seat was needed for people of higher status. You told me that this wedding was an exclusive event and that only real family belongs here." My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I immediately held up my hand, silencing her with a single sharp gesture. "You were absolutely right," I continued, my tone lowering into a fierce, unwavering cadence. "Only real family belongs here. But real family does not steal credit cards from their future in-laws. Real family does not secretly gamble away their home and hide behind their daughter's paycheck. Real family does not use their child as a corporate bank and then run to Facebook to launch a vicious smear campaign the second that child decides to close the vault. You wanted a boundary. You wanted to disinvite me from your perfect, wealthy aesthetic. I am simply honoring your request. Consider yourselves permanently disinvited from my life." My father buried his face in his hands, letting out a hollow, agonizing groan. My mother squeezed her eyes shut finally, realizing that the bridge was not just burned, it was entirely vaporized. There was no coming back from this. There would be no holiday dinners, no financial bailouts, no tearful reconciliations. I was completely, irrevocably done with them. I turned my back on my family. I did not want to look at them anymore. I buttoned my suit jacket and looked directly at Mr. Mitchell, who was standing quietly behind the concierge desk, observing the entire exchange with silent respect. I then looked at the towering private security guard standing by my side. "Mr. Mitchell," I said smoothly, shifting back into the role of the corporate executive. "This private event has been officially canceled due to extreme financial delinquency and attempted fraud. This lobby is now restricted to paying members and authorized personnel only." I gestured casually over my shoulder toward the weeping bride, the broken father, and the detained mother. "Security!" I commanded, my voice echoing with finality. "Please clear the lobby of all non-members. They are trespassing on my property." The heavy oak doors of the country club closed, shutting out the chaotic wails of my sister and the frantic demands of my mother. Through the massive glass windows of the lobby, I watched the federal police cruiser pull away, taking my mother to the downtown precinct for formal criminal booking. My father and sister were left standing alone on the pristine curb, waiting for a cheap rideshare because they could no longer afford the valet fee for their leased SUV. I did not stay to watch them leave. I thanked Mr. Mitchell and my legal team for their precise execution, stepped into the back of my waiting town car, and headed back to my penthouse. By 6 o'clock that evening, the grand wedding of Courtney and Desmond was officially declared dead. The elite caterers had unpacked the gourmet food, the expensive floral arrangements had been diverted to a local hospital, and the massive ballroom remained entirely dark. Outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline glittered against the dark night sky, a beautiful contrast to the absolute darkness that had just engulfed my family's fake empire. Sitting on my velvet sofa with a fresh cup of tea, I opened my laptop to monitor the digital fallout. In modern, wealthy suburban families, gossip travels faster than light. The news of my mother's arrest, my father's absolute financial ruin, and my true status as a multi-million-dollar corporate chief executive had swept through the extended family group chats like a wildfire. I opened Facebook. The vicious victim playing post my mother had published that morning was suddenly gone. The frantic digital cleanup had begun. Relatives who had aggressively attacked me in the comments just hours earlier were now scrambling to delete their digital footprints, terrified of being on the bad side of the family's actual breadwinner. My phone illuminated with a barrage of incoming text messages. This time it was not a chorus of insults. It was a pathetic, transparent symphony of groveling. Aunt Joanne, who had called me an ungrateful monster at 9 in the morning, sent a massive paragraph at 7 in the evening. "Oh, sweetheart," her message read. "I just heard the horrifying news about your mother. I am in absolute shock. I always knew Brenda had a toxic, deceitful streak, but I never imagined she would do something so criminal. We need to get together for brunch this week. I am so incredibly proud of the empire you have built. You are the true success story of this family." Right beneath her message, my cousin Michael chimed in. "Hey, rich cousin," he texted. "Crazy day, right? Listen, I knew Aunt Brenda was lying all along. Anyway, I actually have a massive commercial real estate idea I want to pitch to you. Let me know when you are free for a quick call." I read their messages with a cold, clinical detachment. These people did not love me. They did not care about the emotional abuse I had endured for 3 decades. They were simply drawn to money like parasites to a host eager to latch onto whoever held the largest bank account. I did not type out a long, emotional response to Aunt Joanne. I did not engage in a debate with Cousin Michael. I simply opened my photo gallery, selected the high-resolution screenshots I had taken that morning, and attached them to the chat. I sent Aunt Joanne the exact screenshot where she called me a bitter, jealous psycho who belonged in a psychiatric ward. I sent Michael the screenshot where he declared I was dead to the bloodline. I did not add a single word of text to the images. I just let their own hateful words stare right back at them. The moment the images delivered, I tapped the settings icon and blocked both of their numbers permanently. I repeated this exact silent process for every single relative who dared to text me an apology. Send screenshot, block number, delete conversation. Within 15 minutes, my phone was completely purged of every toxic connection I had ever possessed. The silence in my penthouse was absolute and incredibly peaceful. I set my phone down on the glass coffee table, finally feeling the heavy weight of 33 years lift off my shoulders. I had won. But just as I closed my eyes to rest, the screen of my phone lit up one final time. It was an incoming text message from an unsaved Atlanta area code. I picked it up and read the preview. It was Desmond. I fully expected him to ask for legal advice or maybe even demand an explanation for Courtney's behavior. Instead, the message was remarkably simple and profound. Rebecca, the text read, "I know you owe this family absolutely nothing, but I needed to reach out. Thank you. You did not just expose a massive financial fraud today, you saved me from spending the rest of my life trapped in a disastrous toxic marriage. I owe you a debt I can never repay." I read Desmond's message twice, locked my phone, and finally allowed myself a full, uninterrupted night of sleep. When I woke up, the weekend was over and Monday morning had arrived. The corporate world was waking up, and so were the relentless wheels of the legal system I had set into motion. It was exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, the precise deadline established by the formal 24-hour eviction notice. 30 miles away in the affluent manicured suburb where I grew up, my parents were sitting in the kitchen of the house they no longer owned. My mother had been released on bail late Sunday evening, a feat Richard only managed by pawning his last remaining luxury watch. Despite facing federal felony charges and having a legally binding document handed directly to her, my mother was still suffering from a profound, terrifying level of narcissistic delusion. She was drinking coffee at the Granite Island, wearing her silk bathrobe, fully convinced that I was just trying to teach them a lesson. She firmly believed that I would never actually pull the trigger. She thought her title as my mother granted her absolute untouchable immunity from real-world consequences. She was dead wrong. At 8:05, a heavy, dark SUV belonging to the county sheriff's department pulled into the long driveway. Two uniformed deputies stepped out carrying clipboards and heavy steel lockboxes. The crunch of their boots on the gravel shattered the quiet suburban morning. Inside the house, my mother looked out the kitchen window and saw the flashing yellow lights of the cruiser. Her delusion instantly evaporated, replaced by frantic, animalistic panic. She dropped her coffee mug into the sink and sprinted toward the front foyer. She slammed the heavy wooden door shut, threw the deadbolt, and aggressively wedged a wooden dining chair under the brass handle. "Brenda, what are you doing?" Richard croaked, his voice raw and exhausted as he shuffled into the hallway. "I am not leaving my house," she shrieked, pressing her back against the wood as if her sheer body weight could stop the law. "It is a bluff. She is just trying to scare us." Heavy, authoritative knocks pounded against the outside of the door, causing the wood to vibrate against my mother's back. "Sheriff's Department," a loud voice barked. "We are here to execute a lawful eviction and property lockout order. Open the door immediately." My mother spun around, pressing her face against the narrow glass pane beside the door. "You cannot do this," she screamed at the deputies standing on the porch. "I am the mother of the property owner. I have squatter's rights. I have lived in this home for 30 years. You cannot throw a mother out onto the street." The lead deputy did not flinch. He did not look sympathetic. He looked at my mother through the glass with the tired expression of a man who dealt with entitled criminals every single day. "Ma'am, the law does not care about your DNA," the deputy stated loudly, his voice easily piercing the glass. "You are an unauthorized tenant occupying a commercially owned property. The grace period has expired. If you do not remove that barricade and open this door in the next 10 seconds, we will breach it by force, and you will be arrested for a second time this weekend." My mother opened her mouth to argue, but she never got the chance. Richard stepped forward, his face completely devoid of any remaining fight. He looked like a hollow shell of the man who had once terrified me. He grabbed my mother by the shoulders and physically pulled her away from the door. She kicked and wailed, but he ignored her. He kicked the wooden chair away, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the door open. The deputies stepped inside immediately, their hands resting on their utility belts. "You have exactly 10 minutes to gather your essential medications and basic clothing," the lead deputy ordered, pulling 3 heavy-duty black plastic garbage bags from his back pocket and tossing them onto the polished hardwood floor. "We are changing the locks right now. Anything left behind becomes the property of the holding company." My mother stared at the black plastic bags in absolute horror. She was a woman who only traveled with matching designer luggage. Now she was being timed by armed law enforcement as she frantically stuffed wrinkled clothes, loose shoes, and toiletries into trash bags. Exactly 10 minutes later, the deputies escorted my parents out the front door. The morning sun was bright, illuminating their ultimate humiliation. Richard walked with his head hung low, dragging a bulging trash bag over the concrete. My mother followed, her hair wild, clutching her purse and a garbage bag full of shoes. But the worst part for my mother was not the police. It was the audience. The commotion had drawn the attention of the neighborhood. Mrs. Gable, the wealthy woman next door who had endured years of my mother bragging about her elite status and Courtney's fabulous life, was standing on her porch holding her morning paper. 2 other neighbors had stopped walking their dogs, standing openly on the sidewalk watching the spectacle. The grand, wealthy facade my mother had spent decades maintaining, completely shattered right there on the manicured lawn. She tried to hide her face behind her hair, but there was nowhere to hide. The entire neighborhood was watching the fake socialite get dragged out of her home with nothing but her garbage. I waited in my car down the street until the sheriff's cruisers finally drove away, taking my parents and their trash bags with them. I did not want a dramatic confrontation on the front lawn. I did not come here to gloat or revel in their public humiliation. I just wanted to secure my financial asset. I pulled my car into the empty driveway, killed the engine, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The front door was propped wide open, the new heavy-duty brass locks already installed by the locksmith the deputies had contracted. I stepped over the threshold into the house where I had spent my entire childhood. The silence was deafening. It did not feel like a home anymore. It felt like an abandoned movie set after the production had permanently shut down and the actors had all been fired. The floors were scuffed with harsh black marks from their frantic packing. Discarded plastic hangers, empty shoeboxes, and shattered glass from a dropped decorative vase littered the grand foyer. My mother had always obsessed over keeping this house looking like a pristine museum for the neighbors, but in her panicked, legally mandated exit, she had left it looking like a disaster zone. I walked past the formal dining room and headed straight for the master bedroom. I did not come here to inspect the damage or mourn the loss of a family unit that never truly existed. I came here for one specific item. My mother had threatened via text message to throw my grandmother's antique heirlooms into the trash compactor, completely unaware that I possessed the master combination to the hidden floor safe bolted beneath the walk-in closet floorboards. I stepped into the closet, pushed aside a pile of discarded designer clothing my mother could not fit into her garbage bags, and pulled up the loose corner of the custom carpet. I knelt down and dialed the 4-digit code into the heavy steel dial. The locking mechanism clicked open with a satisfying metallic thud. Inside the dark cavity, resting in a faded velvet box, was my grandmother's vintage sapphire necklace and her diamond wedding band. It was the only genuine, beautiful thing this family had ever possessed, and the only physical memory I actually cared about saving. I slipped the velvet box into my designer handbag, feeling a profound sense of closure wash over me. The very last emotional hostage my mother held over my head was officially safely in my possession. I stood up, smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer, and walked back out to the main living area, just as my lead commercial contractor David walked through the front door. He was carrying a thick clipboard and a laser measuring tool, his heavy work boots crunching on the debris scattered across the hardwood. David took one look around the chaotic, dated living room and raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Are we doing a standard cosmetic flip on this one, Madam CEO?" he asked, tapping his heavy pen against his clipboard. I shook my head, my cold eyes scanning the pale blue walls of my childhood prison. "Absolutely not," I replied, my voice steady and entirely resolute. "I want you to gut the entire interior down to the wooden studs, tear out the carpets, smash the granite counters, knock down the partition walls, and rip up the hardwood floors. I want every single trace of the previous layout completely erased from existence. Modernize it, stage it with high-end contemporary furniture, and prep it for an immediate cash sale on the market. Do not leave a single room looking the way it does right now." I was not just renovating a piece of real estate, I was physically dismantling the architecture of my childhood trauma. David nodded firmly, quickly writing down the aggressive demolition orders without questioning my directive. He knew better than to ask for sentimental exceptions. I turned to leave, ready to lock the new deadbolt and never step foot inside this structure again. But as I walked out onto the front porch, a cheap sedan with a rideshare sticker on the windshield abruptly pulled up to the curb. The back door opened and Courtney stepped out. She was no longer wearing her silk bridal robe or her perfectly tailored designer outfits. She was wearing baggy gray sweatpants, her blonde hair was tied in a messy, greasy knot, and she was dragging two large, incredibly heavy suitcases across the concrete sidewalk. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying all weekend, her golden child persona entirely shattered by the brutal reality of poverty. She saw me standing on the porch, holding the new keys, dropped the handles of her luggage, and rushed up the front steps, her face twisted into a pathetic, desperate plea. "Rebecca?" she begged, her voice cracking as she stared at the newly changed locks. "Please let me sleep in my old bedroom just for a few nights." I looked down at her from the top of the concrete steps. The crisp autumn breeze blew a stray strand of blonde hair across her tear-stained face. She looked absolutely pathetic, a far cry from the arrogant, demanding bride who had stood in the country club lobby just 48 hours ago wearing a custom silk robe. She dragged her heavy suitcases a few inches closer to the porch, her eyes darting frantically toward the heavy brass deadbolt I had just locked. "I have absolutely nowhere else to go," Courtney sobbed, her voice trembling as she wrapped her arms around herself to ward off the morning chill. "Desmond blocked my number on everything. He blocked me on all social media, and when I tried to call his office, his receptionist told me I was legally barred from contacting him. All of my bridesmaids are ignoring my texts because the entire neighborhood knows what happened. Mom and Dad went to a cheap motel, but they do not even have enough room for themselves, let alone me. Please, Rebecca, I am your little sister. Just unlock the door. I will sleep on the floor in my old room. I just need a place to stay while I figure this out." I did not reach for the keys in my pocket. I did not soften my posture or offer her a sympathetic smile. I simply stood there, letting her desperate words hang in the quiet suburban air. "This is not your old room anymore," I stated coldly, my voice completely flat. "This is an active commercial construction site owned by Apex Real Estate Holdings. The interior is being demolished starting today. There are no beds, there is no electricity or running water. And even if there were, you are not authorized to be on the premises." Courtney gasped, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes. "How can you be so incredibly heartless?" she wailed, stomping her foot on the pavement like a spoiled toddler throwing a tantrum. "I lost my fiancé. I lost my wedding. I lost my entire life. I have $20 in my checking account because Mom made me spend all my savings on the bridal shower aesthetic. You have multiple properties. You have millions of dollars. You cannot just leave your own flesh and blood stranded on the sidewalk." I slowly walked down the concrete steps, stopping when I was exactly 1 foot away from her. She instinctively shrank back from the cold, intense authority radiating from my presence. "Let me refresh your memory," I said, keeping my tone perfectly even, and dangerously quiet. Do you remember my 27th birthday? I was working a 16-hour shift reviewing commercial lease agreements to secure my very first boutique hotel. You were on a yacht in Miami, paid for by Dad's secret credit cards. You sent me a text message with a picture of you holding a glass of champagne. Do you remember what you wrote? Courtney swallowed hard, her eyes darting away from mine. She did not answer. You wrote that I was a pathetic, ugly corporate drone wasting my youth in a cubicle, I reminded her. You told me I was going to die alone with my spreadsheets, while you were destined for high society. For my entire adult life, you mocked my ambition. You laughed at my long hours. You treated my apartment like a joke. You believed that because you were blonde and pretty, the world owed you a luxurious existence without you ever having to lift a single finger. I pointed a manicured finger at her heavy suitcases. You have a communications degree from a very expensive private university that I unknowingly paid for. You never bothered to use it because you genuinely thought marrying a wealthy man was a valid career path. You thought you could just manipulate your way into the upper class and leave me behind to foot the bill? Courtney opened her mouth to argue, her face flushing with humiliated rage, but I cut her off immediately. Well, the bank is officially closed, Courtney. It is time to enter the workforce. I suggest you open your laptop, update your resume, and start looking for an entry-level position. Because marrying rich is not a career, and stealing credit cards will only get you a prison sentence. I did not wait for her response. I walked right past her, the sharp click of my stilettos echoing loudly on the pavement. I unlocked my sleek luxury sedan, slid into the plush leather driver's seat, and started the engine with the push of a button. The engine purred smoothly as I pulled away from the curb. I checked my rearview mirror one last time. Courtney was standing completely alone on the sidewalk, surrounded by her heavy luggage, staring blankly at the empty house she used to rule. I turned the corner and drove toward the city, leaving my toxic past entirely in the rearview mirror. 6 months later, the bitter winter had completely thawed, giving way to a bright, promising Chicago spring. I was sitting at the polished mahogany desk in my corner office at Apex Hospitality Group, looking out over the vibrant city below. The company had just closed its most profitable quarter in history. I was no longer hiding my success to appease people who resented my ambition. I was living completely authentically, unburdened by the constant, exhausting demands of my toxic relatives. My desk phone chimed with a private incoming call. It was Jonathan, my lead corporate litigator. Over the past half-year, he had been meticulously untangling the absolute mess my parents had made of their lives, ensuring that my assets remained completely insulated from their radioactive fallout. I pressed the speaker button, leaning back in my ergonomic leather chair. "Good morning, Jonathan," I said, taking a sip of my sparkling water. "Do you have the final update for me?" "Good morning, Madam CEO," Jonathan replied, his voice projecting crisp and clear through the speaker. "I just received the official court disposition from the county prosecutor. The criminal proceedings against your mother have officially concluded." I listened intently, feeling a strange sense of emotional detachment. "What is the final verdict?" I asked. Jonathan rustled some papers on his end. Brenda's public defender managed to negotiate a plea deal right before the trial started. Because the country club did not actually lose the $150,000, and because this was technically her first criminal offense on paper, the district attorney agreed to reduce the charge from felony wire fraud to a lesser charge of attempted commercial fraud. She pled guilty yesterday morning. She avoided a prison sentence, but she was handed 3 years of strict supervised probation and 500 hours of mandatory community service. I let out a short, quiet breath. The thought of my mother, a woman who used to scoff at anyone who wore last season's designer shoes, picking up trash on the side of the highway, or scrubbing floors at a community center, was the ultimate karmic justice. Her fake high society aesthetic had been entirely replaced by a fluorescent orange safety vest. She now had to report to a probation officer every single week, stripping away every ounce of her arrogant autonomy. "And what about my father?" I asked, shifting the conversation to Richard. Jonathan sighed, his tone shifting from legal to strictly financial. Richard is completely destitute. His remaining creditors aggressively pursued him for the outstanding gambling debts. To avoid serving jail time for the fraudulent loans he took out years ago, his wages are being heavily garnished. He is currently working 6 days a week as an overnight security watchman at a commercial warehouse in the industrial district. The irony was staggering. The man who had mockingly ordered me to call my boss to fix his problems was now walking the perimeter of a cold warehouse at 3 in the morning, just to afford basic groceries. They could not afford to stay in the suburbs, Jonathan continued. They are currently renting a cramped, unrenovated one-bedroom apartment in a highly undesirable neighborhood on the far south side of the city. According to the court documents, they do not even have a vehicle. They rely entirely on public transportation to get to their minimum wage jobs. I absorbed the reality of their new existence. They had spent their entire lives trying to project an image of effortless wealth, sacrificing my mental health and my financial stability to build a fragile house of cards. Now that house had collapsed, leaving them with absolutely nothing but the crushing reality of their own choices. Speaking of houses, Jonathan said, his tone lightening significantly. I also have excellent news regarding the suburban property. Your contractor David finished the massive renovation last month. The staging was immaculate. We listed the property on the market 14 days ago, and a bidding war broke out immediately. We just closed the sale this morning. You secured a massive profit of $850,000 over your initial investment. A genuine smile spread across my face. I had taken the very site of my childhood trauma and turned it into a highly lucrative commercial victory. Excellent work, Jonathan, I said. What is the final step? I am sending a digital courier to your inbox right now, he replied. It is the final severance agreement. This document legally and financially insulates you from them permanently. If they ever attempt to contact you, demand money, or show up on your property, this document triggers an automatic restraining order. A soft chime echoed from my computer monitor. The email had arrived. I opened the encrypted document, retrieved my digital stylus, and signed my name on the dotted line. With one swift stroke, I permanently severed my financial and legal identity from the people who had tried to destroy me. Even with the legal severance firmly in place, I should have known that a true narcissist never actually respects a boundary. They only view a locked door as a challenge. 2 weeks after I signed the final severance agreement, my executive assistant walked into my office holding a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was marked "Personal and Confidential Urgent Health Matter," addressed to me in the unmistakable looping cursive handwriting of my mother. Since I had permanently blocked her phone number, blocked her email address, and completely erased her digital access to my life, she had resorted to sending physical mail directly to the corporate headquarters of Apex Hospitality Group. I did not panic when I saw the envelope. My heart did not race. I took it from my assistant, thanked her, and waited for the heavy glass door of my office to click shut. I picked up a silver letter opener and sliced through the thick paper. Inside were 4 pages of handwritten text, heavily stained with what were clearly manufactured theatrical teardrops. I sat back in my leather chair and began to read. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. My mother had pulled out the absolute ultimate weapon in the toxic parent arsenal, the dying mother card. The first 2 pages were dedicated to a highly exaggerated, vague description of a recent medical scare. She claimed her heart was failing under the immense stress of living in a terrible neighborhood, and that her doctors warned her she might not have much time left. She painted a pathetic picture of her and my father shivering in their small apartment, completely ignoring the fact that their situation was the direct result of their own federal crimes and decades of financial deceit. Then came the apologies, or rather, the narcissistic illusion of an apology. She wrote, "Rebecca, I am so incredibly sorry that you felt hurt by the minor miscommunications at your sister's wedding. I never intended for you to take my words so personally. You know I was just under a lot of pressure to make things perfect. We all make mistakes, and as a family we need to let go of this toxic resentment and find it in our hearts to forgive." I scoffed aloud in the quiet of my office. I am sorry that you felt hurt. The classic textbook non-apology. She was not apologizing for stealing a credit card, attempting felony fraud, or treating me like a disposable bank account for 30 years. She was apologizing for my reaction to her abuse. She was blaming me for being too sensitive. The final page finally revealed the true motive behind the sudden terminal illness and the fake apologies. She wrote, "Because of my failing health, Richard has had to take time off from his security job. We are facing eviction again. I know you are still angry, but I am begging you as the woman who gave you life, please just send us a small temporary loan of $50,000. It is a drop in the bucket for your company, but it will save your dying mother from spending her last days on the street. Please, Rebecca, do the right thing." 10 years ago, this letter would have destroyed my week. I would have felt a crushing wave of guilt and immediately wired the funds, terrified of being a bad daughter. But today, reading those desperate manipulative words, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no guilt, just a cold, clinical amusement. I reached into the top drawer of my mahogany desk and pulled out a bright red felt tip pen. I smoothed the 4 pages out on my desk and began to read the letter a second time, treating it not as a plea from a mother, but as a poorly written essay from a manipulative student. Every time she wrote, "I am sorry you felt," I circled the phrase in bright red ink and wrote, "gaslighting" in the margin. Next to the paragraph detailing her mysterious heart condition, I wrote, "provide certified medical documentation." I drew a massive thick red line straight through her request for a $50,000 loan. At the very bottom of the 4th page, I wrote a single giant letter F. I did not write a letter of my own. I did not include a check. I did not offer a single word of explanation, anger, or justification. I simply folded the heavily graded bleeding red pages back together and slid them into a fresh corporate envelope. I wrote her return address on the front, slapped a stamp on the corner, and dropped it into my outgoing mail tray. As I watched the mail clerk take the envelope away, an hour later, a profound realization washed over me. For my entire life, I had fought, argued, and screamed trying to make my family understand my worth. But a narcissist feeds on your anger just as much as they feed on your love. Any reaction is fuel for their delusion. By sending that letter back without a single word of my own, I was cutting off her oxygen completely. Silence and total absence are the ultimate unbearable punishments for a narcissist. That lesson applied just as heavily to my sister. While my parents were trapped in their cramped apartment suffocating on their own toxic resentment, Courtney was experiencing a brutal, unforgiving collision with the real world. Without my stolen funds to finance her luxurious delusion, and with the affluent Atlanta family permanently closing their doors to her, she had absolutely no safety net. Her expensive communications degree from a private university was practically useless without actual work experience, industry connections, or a wealthy husband to bankroll her lifestyle. The spoiled golden child finally had to get a job. I had not gone out of my way to discover where she was employed. I genuinely did not care. I was entirely focused on the massive nationwide expansion of the Apex Hospitality Group. On a crisp Tuesday afternoon, I left my corporate office to handle a personal errand. I needed to purchase a high-end closing gift for a major international hotel investor who was flying into town. My private town car dropped me off on the Magnificent Mile, Chicago's premier luxury shopping district. I walked into an exclusive designer boutique, known for its imported Italian leather goods. The store was quiet, smelling of expensive suede, polished cedar, and rich perfume. I browsed the pristine glass display cases for about 10 minutes before selecting a beautiful handcrafted leather portfolio. I picked up the heavy item and looked around for a sales associate. Near the back of the boutique, standing by a display table of folded cashmere sweaters, was a blonde woman with her back turned to me. She was wearing the store's mandatory uniform, a simple black blazer, a modest black skirt, and sensible flat shoes. "Excuse me," I said clearly, walking toward the display table. "Could you ring this up for me?" The sales associate turned around. It was Courtney. The moment our eyes met, Time seemed to completely freeze inside the boutique. The color instantly drained from my sister's face, leaving her looking sickly and pale under the bright, expensive showroom lighting. She was holding a folded beige cashmere sweater in her hands, and her fingers immediately began to tremble. I looked at her chest. Pinned to her basic black blazer was a cheap plastic name tag bearing her first name. There was no massive diamond engagement ring on her finger. There was no arrogant smirk on her lips. She looked exhausted, humbled, and completely trapped in a life she used to openly mock. For a split second, I saw pure, unadulterated terror flash in her eyes. She braced herself physically, her shoulders tensing as she waited for the inevitable attack. She fully expected me to leverage this moment to completely destroy her. She thought I would mock her uniform, laugh at her minimum wage position, and humiliate her in front of her store manager, who was organizing a rack of coats a few feet away. She thought I would demand she bow down to the wealthy CEO's sister she had abused for her entire life. But I did not feel a single ounce of vindictive triumph. I just felt a profound, peaceful indifference. I looked at her not as my cruel, manipulative sister, but as a completely random retail employee. I held out the leather portfolio. "I would like to purchase this." "Please," I said, my voice perfectly polite, professional, and entirely devoid of any personal recognition. Courtney stared at me, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. She slowly set the cashmere sweater down on the table, her hands shaking so badly she knocked over a small acrylic display sign. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Right away." She walked behind the polished glass cash wrap. I stood patiently on the other side of the counter, scrolling through a business email on my phone, while she nervously scanned the barcode. The digital scanner beeped loudly in the quiet store. She folded the leather portfolio with trembling hands, placed it inside a thick, branded shopping bag, and tied a black silk ribbon around the handles. "That will be $850, she said, her eyes fixed entirely on the cash register screen, absolutely terrified to look up at me. I pulled my solid titanium corporate credit card from my wallet and tapped it against the digital reader. The transaction was instantly approved. I retrieved a crisp $100 bill from my purse and slid it across the glass counter as a gratuity, a polite gesture I made for every retail worker who assisted me. Courtney handed me the shopping bag across the glass. I took it, slinging the thick ribbon over my wrist. I finally looked her directly in the eyes. Her breath hitched in her throat, waiting for the final, devastating insult to drop. "Thank you," I said with a polite, dismissive nod. "Have a good afternoon." I turned around and walked out of the boutique, the heavy glass doors gliding shut behind me. I did not look back. I did not even think about her as I stepped back into my waiting town car. Inside the store, Courtney remained frozen behind the cash register. She stared blankly at the glass doors long after my car had merged into the busy downtown traffic. The realization washed over her like a physical blow. I had not yelled. I had not gloated. I had simply treated her with the icy, polite indifference one gives to an absolute stranger. She finally understood that she no longer mattered enough to even warrant my anger. She was nothing to me. And that absolute, permanent indifference destroyed her fragile ego more thoroughly than any insult ever could. The seasons continued to turn, washing away the bitter remnants of my past and ushering in the crisp, golden chill of November. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, the Chicago wind howled over Lake Michigan, whipping the autumn leaves through the concrete canyons of the city. But inside, the atmosphere was a sanctuary of absolute warmth, glowing with amber candlelight and echoing with the sound of genuine, uninhibited laughter. It was Thanksgiving evening. The massive mahogany dining table in my foyer, the exact same table where my parents had once stood, demanding I reinstate their fraudulent wedding discount, was now expanded to its maximum length. It was covered in a rich linen tablecloth, heavy crystal wine glasses, and silver platters overflowing with roasted turkey, fresh sage stuffing, and warm cranberry glaze. But the most beautiful part of the evening was not the extravagant feast or the sheer luxury of the penthouse. It was the people sitting in the chairs. There was not a single drop of shared blood at that table. My biological family was miles away, likely eating cheap frozen dinners in their cramped apartment, consumed by the bitter, inescapable resentment of their own consequences. Instead, I was surrounded entirely by my chosen family. To my right sat Jonathan, my ruthless corporate litigator, who was currently telling a hilarious story about a courtroom mishap while his husband poured him another glass of red wine. Across the table was David, my lead commercial contractor, proudly showing pictures of his newborn daughter to Sarah, my brilliant executive assistant, who had become one of my closest confidants. There were mentors who had guided me through the cutthroat corporate world when I was just a terrified junior analyst. There were colleagues who had stood by my side during the most grueling hotel acquisitions. There were friends who had held my hand through the darkest, loneliest nights of my 20s, when my mother would call just to systematically tear down my self-esteem. None of these people cared about the square footage of my property. None of them cared about maintaining a flawless, wealthy aesthetic for the neighbors. They had earned their seats at my table through years of unwavering loyalty, brutal honesty, and mutual respect. We were not bound by the random, unpredictable lottery of genetics. We were bound by choice. I sat at the head of the table holding a glass of vintage champagne, simply watching them interact. The paralyzing anxiety that used to define my holidays was entirely gone. There were no passive-aggressive insults disguised as jokes. There were no frantic attempts to hide massive financial secrets. There was no walking on eggshells to protect a fragile golden child. There was just peace. Pure, unadulterated peace. I slowly stood up, raising my glass slightly to quiet the room. The conversation naturally faded into a warm, attentive silence. I looked at the faces of the people who had actually raised me, the people who had built me up instead of tearing me down. I offered a short, heartfelt toast to their health, their happiness, and the incredible future we were all building together. They raised their glasses in unison, the crystal chiming beautifully in the warm air. As I took my seat and the lively conversation resumed, I looked out the window at the glittering city lights and allowed myself a final moment of internal reflection. For 33 years, I had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of power. When I was younger, crying in my childhood bedroom after another one of my mother's vicious tirades, I thought power was about revenge. I thought it was about acquiring enough money, enough status, and enough authority to finally force them to respect me. I wanted to build an empire just so I could stand at the top and watch them grovel at the bottom. But sitting here tonight entirely insulated from their toxic chaos, I finally understood the truth. True power is not about destroying the people who hurt you. You do not have to orchestrate their downfall or actively seek their ruin, because people who build their lives on lies and manipulation will inevitably destroy themselves. True power is about outgrowing them. It is about elevating your own life, your own standards, and your own environment so completely that they simply cannot reach you anymore. True power is looking at the vast empty space where their abuse used to live and realizing that their permanent absence has become your absolute greatest asset. I took a slow, deep breath, inhaling the scent of the roasted sage and the rich wine, feeling the solid oak of the chair beneath me. I looked at my brilliant, loyal, chosen family, laughing together in the candlelight. They told me I was not invited to the wedding because only real family belonged there. They were right. I did not belong with them. I belonged right here in the life I built for myself.